I just stopped it. Nobody stopped. I had to run to go to the hotel. So I just stopped the last session, and it'll be a little bit of editing to do. It's just a backup. We only have 4 cameras and there's 5 sessions. So, just about here.
So the shows up on YouTube.
Yes, I already checked the audio this morning. It's good. So you're sharing your screen right now.
Okay.
Audio's good. The camera's on. I'm recorded back here. Have fun.
Good. Yeah, I'm just gonna play this clip for a couple minutes.
Okay.
I don't have any slides or anything. It's just gonna be straight,
Okay.
dull discussion.
I'll be right next door if you need anything.
Can we check to see if it's
I don't see that. I wonder how you it seems like it'd be one of those areas. Oh, it doesn't.
did show up?
Yeah. Oh, you think that's okay.
Maybe good cold feet. But that's okay.
Yeah.
I tried, it didn't go through my email number. Send another email.
We're just going to give it another minute or two. One of the presenters actually is going to be on Zoom, Christopher Miller. But he's not there yet, and we're panicking. He doesn't know the Zoom room, so we're just trying to.
What's the?
The Wi-Fi. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 2.
So not guess, we should be Wi-Fi.
No, he's got it.
Okay.
Are you, are you texting or emailing him?
We're trying to, yeah.
I just even that's why they call him, but I think the number is disconnected. It's an old number.
You do that very well.
I will just give it one back. Start. That's
That's more information.
Oh wait, something's happening. There he is. Christopher, can you hear us? How do I talk to him?
Is this audio on? Oh, okay. So our audio is working.
Okay, Lisa's here. Oh yeah.
Oh, that, okay, yeah, where it says mute, it's sort of rising.
Hello, Chris. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. How are you?
He looks like he's trying to.
I'll hold up a sign. Turn on your mic.
Is there a
The
text
camera
box?
is to your lower left.
What?
The camera to your lower left. You just walk in front of
Oh
it.
yeah, yeah. But
It's your butt.
what about the microphone?
Did you want to use the text box? There should be like a text box where you can like type something. Tell him.
Can you guys hear me?
Look, we can't hear you yet. Hello, Chris.
Hold on, please.
Oh,
Get it? Get it?
yes, we can hear you now.
Good. Good.
Welcome. Okay, we were waiting your arrival, and now that you're here, we'll begin with Robert's presentation, and then we'll turn to you next. Actually, the second present, well, I'll start formally. Read the time. Okay. Can you hear me when I'm over here, Christopher?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to panel 6, Philosophical Perspectives on Possibility. I'm Christopher Farrell, moderating this session. Unfortunately, I have to announce our second presenter, Brian Garner, is back at the hotel with food poisoning. He emailed me late last night. Yeah, so he won't be here, unfortunately, to present on Black and Patriotic 21st Century philosophical conundrum. So that leaves us with Robert Henry and Dr. Christopher Miller. We'll begin with Robert. Robert Henry is a doctoral student here in Interdisciplinary Studies PhD program with a focus on American culture. Robert's undergraduate work was in philosophy and his graduate work in theology. He's an educator in the public school system and author of several works of fiction and the nonfiction work titled Epistemic Justification. Should it be viewed as a meta-epistemic process? This morning, we'll speak on intentional possibility, the problem of mechanical thinking in an organic world. Okay. Yeah, Robert.
Okay, first I'm going to start off with a clip. I'll reveal the relevance of it after we show the clip. So, and now if I, let's see. There we go. So when I go on this, it's not going to mess up his.
Yeah,
presence.
so it'll record. You're not going to speak.
Okay, all right. There we go. All right. Hold on one sec. Make sure the audio's working. Where's the audio on this?
Yeah,
Is that, that's it right
Yeah.
there, isn't it? Maybe. Hold on one second. Let me, I'll choose another video. Has the same, it depicts the same scene. We'll just shorten it. Hopefully the audio on this one. There we go.
On Union Wi-Fi, don't balance.
There we go. I paused it to let it buffer, I guess. And pause it just for a sec. Let me maybe minimize it. Work better if it's minimized sometimes.
This might be a lesson in intentionality.
Yeah.
Possible
Yeah. What kind of
intentionality.
choice? What kind of choices we're going to make in response to this this annoyance?
Now, are you streaming Netflix on there? Is that what's
I'm
happening?
using my hotspot, so you can't play with it. I already got kicked off this internet.
You move it ahead, maybe go. Better move it ahead.
The last time we come to this place, Wi-Fi, coffee's cold. Don't you
My
think you're in
relationship
here?
is good at the hotel.
Oh, this is being little humor in this.
I'm using my phone.
Well, I tell you what, we'll just, let me just, I'll just get rid of this.
You want me to do it for my?
Come on, let's get on the shuttle, go back to the.
We'll go back to Kingsgate Hotel. Maybe that'll be a little better. I'll just get out of this because really, basically, this clip is basically showing these two individuals, and what they're doing is they're flipping a coin, and the coin keeps coming up heads. So, and no matter what they do, and no matter how many times they flip it, it comes up heads again and again. So that's basically all it shows. Okay, so in the clip we just watched, which we didn't watch, but the one I just sort of, the one I just sort of recapped for you guys, was from Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. It's a movie based on two minor characters from the Shakespearean play Hamlet. In that, these two characters, their lives, their histories, and life choices revolve around the stories of Hamlet. Their choices are irrelevant. So it doesn't matter how many times they flip the coin. It doesn't matter what they do in their lives. Their lives are irrelevant because the point of the play is about Hamlet. So just as they flip the coin over and over again, the results are always the same. But the unique situation here is that the two characters are conscious of the play. If you'd watched the clip, you would have seen that they're kind of talking about it. They're kind of dialoguing about the situation that, why does it keep coming up heads? Because typically you think, 50% chance it's going to come up tail. So they're talking about it. And not that they're aware that they're characters in the play. They're not talking about how they're characters in the play, minor ones at that, but that they don't have agency, choice in this strange world that they're finding themselves in. And we aren't much different. We live in a world we believe is filled with possibilities. We have expectations, we have intentions. Intentionality, that's where the term intentionality comes from, intention. We have choices, we have free will, we can actually enact changes in the world. So when we flip the coin, it doesn't always turn up heads. So we don't live in that world. When we flip it, sometimes it'll be heads, sometimes it'll be tails, 50% of the time. So we make choices and can enact change in the world by way of intentional possibility. There's a possibility, and the conditions of that possibility is intentionality. In contrast, we are often told that everything in the universe around us is predetermined by mechanistic causes where there is no room for intentionality or intentional possibility. So we're told that. So must we be unscientific to appeal to or make the very claim that there is intentional possibility or choice? We have to assume that we're being unscientific, that we're being kind of primitive in our thinking if we assume that choice exists. I propose no, not at all. That we can still engage in science and be rational and still believe in the fact that we have choice and free will. It is my view that science does not contradict an appeal to agency of intentional possibility choice. One does not need to see the universe as a machine in order to proceed with science or look at the world scientifically. So when we look out at the world, we don't have to look at it as some sort of internal machine where we have cogs and wheels and they're moving in certain ways, but there can be choice and free will inside of the universe. So I suppose we should try to understand how some treat science, some people see it like that, as a mode of discourse investigation that necessarily views the world as one big machine. So there are people, and there are, scientists, scholars that feel that the universe we live in, is nothing but one just huge, giant machine. But in order to even do science, we must first make a couple of assumptions. The first assumption is I exist. I cannot, and the cogito or the ego, and I cannot make a remark on what I observe until I recognize there's an I. Kind of the Cartesian ego. It seems simple enough, but oftentimes we miss this first step when we're doing science, when we're doing any sort of investigation or observation about the world around us. And it reminds us that there is a given, an observer. That's the first step we have to make when we make observations and engage in research. that there's a given and there's an observer. We are the observer. Science requires an observation, but to observe, you have to be an observer. So that's the first step. The second assumption is that I have agency. I'm not a child psychologist, but it would seem that developmentally, the first thing a young child does, this is kind of interesting, is notice he or she can directly affect, alter, destroy, or create things in their environment. That's what children, particularly young, small children, notice. They can stick their fingers in the birthday cake or tear apart the rose. They find a rose, they just tear it apart, or mold a lump of Play-Doh. I mean, kids love to play with Play-Doh, to create something new. We can and do affect the world around us. We are causes. We are causes of change in the world. And the smallest baby will attest to that we make change in the world. Of course, the third assumption is that there are phenomena outside of our intention or agency which affect us. So with first assumption, I am an observer. Do I affect change in the world? But three, there are objects in the world. And there are other agents in the world that I have to tend with, which affect us and the things around us. This could be science or other egos or extrinsic agents. Example, someone smacked you in the face, or things aren't going the way that you would like them to in an argument. So that's immediately proving that there are other agents in the world because they're arguing. So with these assumptions or foundations of knowing, can we use our conclusions of, say, the third assumption to account for the first? Well, some suggest that we can. In other words, the third assumption, which there are objects in the world, can we take that and sort of just throw away the first assumption? There is no observers. There's no given. There is no agency or agent or intentionality or intentional agent. Those that would suggest that who and what we are, our very agency, is nothing more than outside and extrinsic physical systems. We can call this mechanistic or mechanistic thinking. So people who reduce the entire universe to nothing but a machine or a mechanistic thing, that's what we would term mechanistic thinking. That's thinking about the world in mechanistic terms. So what we've seen how mechanistic thinking develops by trying to explain who and your agents, trying to explain who you are and your agency and intentionality. So it's a really big, difficult problem if you look at the world as one big mechanism or machine to understand who you are, because typically we'll just say what you are as opposed to who. But how does mechanistic thinking look? We'll kind of get into what it really looks like. First, the 18th century Scottish skeptic David Hume depicted or illustrated mechanistic thinking in terms of contiguity or touching. For example, a cue ball. I'm not much of a pool player, but the cue ball, you hit the cue ball and it rolls and it touches or contacts another ball, and this causes the other ball to move. Another way to look at it is in the example of a system of dominoes. So you stand up, or you stood up a bunch of dominoes, and as one falls, the next one falls, and the one standing in front of that falls, and the contact or touching is what causes the other one to fall. So you have a very kind of complex system of dominoes, and that's basically just what the world is, nothing but a bunch of dominoes, albeit a very complex system. This example or system of dominoes is, to the mechanistic thinker, is all we really need to explain all events, all phenomena. That's all you need. Just some sort of simplistic model of dominoes or cue balls or whatever. But is that it? Is that all that the universe is? Nothing but a bunch of dominoes, hitting each other, becoming contiguous and touching each other, as Hume had pointed out and also criticized. Well, for one, it doesn't account for the force, not the Star Wars force, not that. But one thing, touching another thing, we're not going to get into the some religious force. But one thing touching another says nothing to not only the initial push, whatever's causing the push, whether it's me, whether it's some sort of other object in nature that's causing the initial push of the first sun to start all of this, but which attracts. But the force which attracts each domino and pulls it down. So when it hits it, it's attracted to the earth and it comes down and hits the other one. So it says nothing to that sort of process. So what is this force? Well, we know how it functions. Scientists know how it functions. They know everything about gravity. We really say what, but can we really say what it is? It has zero mass. It has no observable qualities. Can't see gravity, and that causes motion or mass is unknown in those terms. We don't know anything about it except for how it functions. We can't observe it. So as far as these forces of physics of nature, which are a mystery to anyone embracing a mechanistic model, it really is a mystery. I mean, they know how it works, but they don't know what it is. Perhaps we can account for them in terms of mathematical equations. So if we're not thinking of them in terms of continuity, things touching other things, maybe we can account for it in terms of math. The math explains the fact that you have these forces, particularly using the model of gravity, can explain it. Maybe the mechanistic model of the universe can explain these forces by way of mathematical equations. But yet, Rupert Sheldrake had pointed out there has been a major shift in physics. This is a quote from him. There's been a major shift in physics away from the observable to the virtual. Since the beginning of this century, matter and energy as we know them have been devoted to just 4% of the universe. The rest consists of a hypothetical dark matter and dark energy. Sounds mysterious. So in order to sustain the mechanistic model, various hypothetical entities have to be included in the equation, such as Sheldrake had mentioned, which is some 96% in order for the mechanistic model to work. So 96% of the universe is made up of hypothetical stuff that we don't know about, but it fits in with the math system. So it seems to me that a mechanistic model of the universe, and as we are being a part of the universe, we're obviously all parts of the universe. Since it hangs on such a flimsy premise, in my view, it's a flimsy premise, that this should not be a cause for alarm for those that believe in possibility or intentional possibility. So if you believe in the fact that there's free will, that there's choice, that there's intentionality in the universe, that shouldn't be a problem. These things of dark matter and the idea that there are mechanisms in nature. But how are we to reconcile these two worlds? After all, some things are predictable and they exhibit predetermined behavior. And other things are indeterminate and unpredictable and enigmatic. Events in nature, sometimes we can't really figure them out. We don't know how to really study them. The former provides safety and reliability. So the things that are predictable, mechanistic, very reliable and safe, and we can be assured about them. But the latter, they excite, they excite, and motivate us to action. And a little scary, but they're the things that make us impassioned and excited. So one possible way to distinguish from these two is our perspective. So consider the 17th century French philosopher Blaise Pascal and how he saw the world. Contrary to the growing interest in materialism at this time, at that time, materialism was very popular, he found there was an infinite greatness and an infinite smallness. You just keep going back and stepping back, and you see more and more and more. You can keep focusing your glance at some object or whatever, and you can just keep seeing more and more features of that thing. You never come to this monad or this hypothetical atom that is the foundation of all things. So no matter how far you step back and gaze the whole picture, there's always more to view, more and more. And no matter how much smaller you can slice up the molecule, no matter how much, there's always more to slice up. So how does it seem that the further back you step away from the images of the world, the more determined it appears? This is kind of interesting. But when you look closely at the individual brush strokes, thinking of using the model of a painting, when you step back, you can see the image. When you get closer, you can actually see the individual brush strokes. And it doesn't look the same as when you step back. So when you look at those, the individuals themselves, you see the indeterminacy of the possibility. So when you look at the brush strokes and the little clumps of paint that have dried there, you don't see the whole picture, and it doesn't make as much sense, and you can't figure it out. And that's where the enigma comes from. So infusing chance into the world is not an antiquated notion. Charles Sanders Peirce, in the height of the 19th century scientific enlightenment, tells us that these events, and this is what These events, whose chance-like character and unpredictability are not merely functions of our ignorance of some putative underlying determinate causes. So Peirce is also echoing this. He's saying that the indeterminacy we see in reality and the determinacy are not a problem. There's not some sort of disagreement. This is fine. This is how reality functions. And so our intentionality and our will mirror some of the objective world where chance and unpredictability are expressed. Kind of scary, but it's just the way reality works. Another scientist, Josiah Royce, also attacked the mechanistic model of the world, identifying two other models that can be recognized scientifically, which was the historical and the statistical. So he identified three aspects of reality: the mechanical, the historical, and the statistical. Interesting. He said, this quote from him, "If a law of the physical world does not appear consistent with the mechanistic view of nature, so long as you confine your attention to a single system of bodies whose individual movements you follow and compute, the law may become perfectly intelligible." So when viewed, this is him going on, when viewed as the expression of the average behavior of the kinetic system of complex enough to give an opportunity for the application of statistical laws and for the use of conception of probability. It's kind of a long, drawn-out quote, but basically what he's saying there is that there are various levels of analysis. On some levels of analysis, you're going to see the mechanical. You expect to see that. But on other levels of analysis, you're not going to see that, and you have to use different ways of research, which would include, instead of using the mechanistic model, you use historically, look at things historically, or statistically, you use statistics. So to him, you have these different levels of analysis, and you address reality based on that particular level. So in short, science needn't function primarily on the assumption of a mechanistic world. The world around us cannot be reduced to a machine any more than we can. So in summary, what I presented is an alternative to mechanical thinking. The idea that everything you think, envision, hope for, is all predetermined by prior causes. Rather, I propose that possibility is not some scholarly fodder or epiphenomenon determined by the world, through the world, causes. Rather, it is a real cause of change in the world and in the lives of those around us. So we intend, we act, and we change. So, and hopefully in positive ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Because of the question that Brian has, we have a bit more time here, so I think we can open the floor for a few questions for Robert. Or moving on next to Dr. Miller. So the floor is open. Yeah, Gary.
The painting illustration you gave with the close-up brushstrokes in a standing way, is that meant to illustrate? Could you explain what that illustrates exactly?
Well, that illustrates the various levels of analysis that we can use to address reality. If, for instance, you're looking at reality very closely, you're going to see the individual brushstrokes. When you step back, you're going to see the whole picture. And that was to illustrate how, when we look at our lives individually, right? When we look at our lives individually, we don't see a pattern. That's where free will comes in. I can't figure out what you're going to do at any moment. You might stand up, you might jump in the garbage can. I don't know. In fact, I think Jean-Paul Sartre once said that his own free will scared him because at any moment he could do something crazy. He could jump out the window, or he could just, take off all his clothes and just start running down the streets. So free will is a scary thing because we can't predict it. But when you step back and you look at the picture, then you see the whole picture.
Thank you.
Okay.
You were talking about mechanistic thinking in the beginning,
Yeah.
and my take on that is, or the definition, correct me if I'm wrong, is like for every action, there's a reaction, like with the domino thing.
Yeah.
But can you talk a little bit more about the initial push?
The initial push, I didn't really just want to discuss that because that might get into some cosmological being what's the start of everything.
Right.
I don't want to get into that because I don't know, and I'm not going to make any assumptions about that. But the point is there is a force that starts it already, and from a mechanistic level of analysis, you can't determine what that is. So a scientist can't go, oh, that's the cause of another machine. And if you do that, then you would just go, add it to 9. There's another machine before that. So that's not a really productive way of looking at things. The point I was using to illustrate the idea that there's a force, there are forces, and those forces come within us, which is like our ability to make choices, as well as we see in nature. And even in the model of a mechanism or a machine, you have to take into account these forces that you can't predict, until they start the motion. Once the motion starts, then you can predict, oh, this is going to happen next, and that's going to happen. So from the mechanical level of analysis, then you'll be able to figure out all that stuff. Yeah.
So then is intention always reactionary? Is it always caused by something or part of historical circumstances?
It could be caused by something, but like what I was arguing for is it's not caused by a mechanical system. In other words, for example, if I make choices and those choices are based on some sort of cultural conditioning or whatever, the cultural conditioning can't be reduced to a mechanistic sort of model. You can say it was caused by that, but that goes into what Josiah Royce was talking about, the historical analysis. You can use an historical analysis to understand what caused that choice. You know what I'm saying? I mean, obviously there are some people that would say that some choices are not even caused by other prior choices or other levels of analysis, like historical, that you can't even account for from that perspective. But I think for our purposes here, it's enough to say that prior choices are not caused by a machine, a mechanism, or understanding the nature in terms of mechanistic thinking.
But there's always something that sort of circumscribes or precedes intention. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you would go back to your point. So what's the first push? What's the initial push? Yeah. There's always something. So everything is sort of historical or causal. Yeah,
it's causal, and that's fine. We can say, the reason why I'm doing this is because I was caused to. But you can't say it's caused because of a mechanistic structure. Right? You could say it was caused because of my historical participation in this epoch or this era, or statistically, most people do this. Then you can probably put it from that perspective. However, if you look at it from the perspective of the painting, certain choices we make aren't as easily identified as having a cause as opposed to other ones. Like, for instance, if there's a fire in the back of the room, we can pretty much predict that everyone's going to run up. So there's this kind of like situation where when you're in a community, you typically have more predictable behavior and reactions. But when you're individually, you're just sitting around by yourself. There's no stimuli around you, to influence you, whether it's other people or anything. Then it's harder to determine what your behavior is going to be. And like the brush strokes, when you look at it closely, when you're looking at the individual and identifying them as opposed to the group, that level of analysis, it's impossible. I mean, you couldn't take a Van Gogh painting and stick your nose up to it and say, oh, this is the two figures under whatever the painting is. So you would be able to determine what that type of painting is by looking so closely at it from that perspective.
One question from the chair. Thank you very much for this. I think part of the shift that you suggest with Peirce, Charles Sanders Peirce, and Josiah Royce, away from the mechanistic view is that a mechanistic account is dyadic first. You have, action and reaction. And what, as you know, Peirce offers is this triadic view, that there's a third category, of things that exist in, nature in the world that are required, thirds are required to explain intentionality.
Yeah.
And one of the common examples is always the idea of gift. To try to explain what it means to give a gift with only a mechanistic or dyadic vocabulary is very difficult. Like, I push this in your direction, you receive it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't really, capture the intentionality behind giving something. So it seems like, this is why I find the pragmatist thought this triadic view not only allows for these other things, including laws, intentionality, but there's more agency required to make sense of the world. So I'm wondering if you can maybe come back to the point you started with about agency, because it seemed like where you ended up was a view of possibility that is going to grant more agency than the mechanistic view. But
and that alternative is definitely an alternative to the mechanistic view, and that's fine. And like I alluded to with Josiah Royce, he had identified like the triadic view. He was identifying 3 levels of analysis. So the main point is that we don't have to reduce our agency to a mechanistic model. That's the point. So there are a variety of theories on that. That's fine, and that's great because it opens up the floor to other certain alternatives to the mechanistic model. But the point is there are alternatives, and I think the pragmatists certainly identified that and came up with some very relevant alternatives.
Okay, well, let's thank Robert for Okay, as I said, Ryan Garner is unable to be here because of some food poisoning. Wish him the best. So that we move to our third presenter, Dr. Christopher Peyton Miller, who is a licensed professional counselor, Virginia, Missouri, graduated from Union's PhD program in interdisciplinary studies. Congratulations, Dr. Miller. With a concentration in humanities and culture, Dr. Miller's MS is in counseling and human development. Research interests range from religion to theory. His dissertation was the Kantian discourse analysis of the work of Simone Weil, World War II philosopher, political activist. Dr. Miller has been published in Creative Transformations 2 times, the Family Journal, the Journal of Leadership and Complexity, and his book is now under contract for publication. Congratulations on that. Dr. Miller, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, actually.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen. I first want to say that that was an impressive presentation that was made by Robert. I appreciate that. So tell me if this shares my screen or not.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Okay, so my presentation is on fusion, the subject media process, and multimedia, multimodal digital humanities. So what is multimodal digital humanities? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Terry McPherson notes the following: the aims of to produce work and reconfigures the relationships between author reader and technology. The scholar investigates computer stimulus simultaneously as a platform, a medium, and a visualization device. The scholar thinks carefully about the relationship of form to content, expression to media. The scholar explores new forms of literacy that include authoring and analyzing visual, oral, dynamic, and interactive media. McPherson also asks, how do you experience or feel an argument in a more immersive and sensory-rich space? Can scholarship show as well as tell? Will representing data differently change the ways we understand collective or interpret it? So who better to address utopian registers of much popular commentary on technology as historians of media and scholars of economic and political economy. Okay, so I'm going to show a clip. This assumption that I have about fusion is that there is a connection and a engagement between the media, not the media, as in left or right, but media devices like television, video games, movies, YouTube, phones, PCs, and that sort. So we have two types of totalitarianism and authoritarianism. I'm going to play a clip from, well, I think I'll have time to play this clip. I hope it doesn't mess my screen up, but, and it will take about, I think, 5 minutes. So here goes.
Hi, my name is Dr. Brian Kloss. I'm a fellow in comparative politics at the London School of Economics and the author of Despot's Apprentice, Donald Trump's Attack on Democracy. So Trump is not a despot, but I call him a despot's apprentice because he's borrowing and mimicking tactics that you normally see in authoritarian states. So you have things like the cult of personality, where Trump's ego comes into play, classic hallmark of despot-like behavior. Then you have attacks on the press, demonizing the press. Trump's called them not only fake news, but also the enemy of the people and a stain on America. A few days ago, I called the fake.
Okay. So that was that. According to Slavoj Žižek, Lacan's university discourse can be found in, for example, the Soviet Union as a pure reign of university discourse. Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Benjamin, all three are great anti-authoritarians whose presence in the academy is today all pervasive, demonstrate that the excluded and damned authors are ideal feeding stuff for the academic machine. So fusion addresses the interaction that happens between persons, the masses, and media, not the media. Each person is not just seduced by media, but actually subjugated by and violated by media. So I use Lacanian theory, and I note him saying that he wrote, "I'm not a poet, but a poem that is being written even if it looks like a subject. The subject has been understood over against the object. The subject has had primacy in Western thought." Bruce Fink suggests that the subject as pulsation and short-lived is manifest in slips of the tongue and bungled actions, though one is always responsible for the place of the subject. Robert Kahn Davis identifies the Lacanian subject as a subject of writing or as the entire semiotic system of experience. Also, Davis points out the subject is sustained in the production of meaning. Bruce Finks educates about Lacan's subject in the following way. The subject is split between ego, the unconscious, and between the conscious and the unconscious, between an ineluctably false sense of self and an automatic functioning of language in the unconscious. So it is with fusion that the conscious and the unconscious are invaded and invaded by verbiage and pixelation to the extent that the subject is violated. The premise of the work here is that there is a process of the subject, which is the subject is stolen, is quite different from that of Baudrillard. Fusion is a process which involves elimination of the primary subject. The subject is susceptible to being represented by an object that is an object which is external to the subject. If the person realizes it, the way in which the person and others are seduced and subjugated, then there will be an element of anger which can be used to drive the person to liberation, enlightenment, and empowerment. So for Jean Baudrillard, the subject becomes a pure screen of pure absorption and reabsorption surface of the influent networks. In other words, an individual in the postmodern world becomes merely an entity influenced by media, technology, experience, and the hyperloop. The person is perhaps not conscious of the process happening. Fusion is when the person enters the virtual world process unwittingly and hence experiences the loss during the process. Media is reproduced and melded with the subject in the fusion process. The subject becomes identical to the media in the process. So the subject gets etched in representation which media expresses. The existence or non-existence of the subject in any way, in the way I understand it, is secondary to the process that happens to the person and to societies around the world. Skip that slide. Ilya Kurya demonstrates that subversive media activities in Russia enable Russian media consumers to act independently from official institutionalized sets of rules and constantly violate both traditional rules and the global capitalist media economy based on commercial interests. There are totalizing narratives. In Lacanian terms, the totalizing narrative is designated by the master signifier. Slavoj Žižek refers to the master signifier when stating that as the master points to itself, it is as money refers to itself as having value, and thus everything of value has a purchase price. This is in turn makes commodities and fulfills the commodity fetish. So there's the mesmerizing media and memory. According to Maxine Johnson Sheets, in the West, we are so mesmerized by vision that we have all but forgotten the felt body. As a therapist, I know that the person carries memory in their body and the experience is not just auditory and visual. A person exposed to media of all kinds, including television, computers, game systems, smartphones, etc., become fused to the device. Walk into a private or public setting and you'll see media, for example, families using telephones, cell phones, and not speaking to one another. So, if you get angry enough, breaking away from the spell of media, fusion is the subject media process. It's a process whereby the psyche is affected to the degree that one loses oneself in the process that envelops them. In order to be free from this assault on the subject, one must become aware of this manipulation and process and become enlightened enough to be angry and break away from the process. So break the spell of media.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we have plenty of time for questions, comments. Come closer to the mic, I'm not sure. Go back.
Yeah, Dr. I have a question. When you talk about the subject that's being violated, I mean, any kind of communication is essentially a two-way street, right? So you have the receiver and the subject being represented through the media, making a speech, for instance, that little Trump speech or excerpt that you played. So when you talk about angry enough and breaking away, are you talking about the receiver, the viewer, the audience, or you're talking about the subject being featured and in the process of being featured or broadcast, sort of being rendered, being absorbed by the media? Where does that kind of breaking away should it happen?
Yeah, well, with media, what I'm talking about is the person watching or involved with the media device. And the breaking away is done when one realizes that they are indeed caught up in this process, and then they're able to break away from that, to turn your head from the media, turn your eyes from the media, close your ears from media. And again, I must add that I'm not talking about left or right. I'm talking about the process that happens between media and the subject.
Other questions, comments?
How would you compare the way that we have media today as opposed to 50 years ago? Was this an issue 30, 40 years ago? Or was it less of an issue then, and now it's just exploded due to the fact that we have all these digital devices that our faces are in at all times?
Yeah, okay. Sure, we had it 40, 50 years ago. We had involvement in this process with television. I do think it's more pervasive now that you can go anywhere and a person can be engaged in media process. Let's see here. I mean, there were people who wrote, McLuhan wrote about the medium and how that is the message. But yeah, I think it's more pervasive now. It's been written about in the past. There's really nothing new here, other than that I'm saying that there is an entrapment by media with the subject.
Chris, thank you. This is Chris Farrell. How are you doing?
Yeah.
I want to ask you about this breaking the spell process. Because some recent work by a philosopher, Tracy Yanera, looked at the ways in which people have sort of broken out of hate groups to which they've been indoctrinated sometimes.
Yes.
Whether it's, Ku Klux Klan or some extreme religious fundamentalists. And she studied cases of this, and it turns out to be a rather, long and difficult process to move from one sort of worldview. And I'm thinking in less extreme cases of the kind of propaganda and media that you might have in mind, whether it's Fox News or what have you, and to move from one way of making sense of the world and facts and everything to another is very difficult. And what she found is that the key thing were person-to-person relationships, redemptive relationships, she calls them, over time, that allowed people to transition out of one of these, paradigms into which they've been seduced. There's a thing on Netflix called Accidental Courtesy. I don't know if people are familiar with Daryl Davis, this African-American jazz musician, dedicated his life to basically turning Ku Klux Klan members. And he, he does it by spending time with them face to face. And some of this is captured in the film. It's quite extraordinary. But it takes years, really, it seems. So I'm just wondering what sort of process and, the role of relationships, if you've thought about that at all, in relation to breaking the spell.
Yes. Well, I think that fusion is causing, with no disrespect to people with autism, but fusion is creating in people's involvement with media. I see kids and adults even all the time who are engrossed in the media process that I'm talking about, and we're growing into a culture of autism, a culture where the relationship with the person across from you, at the table across from you, is actually less important than the process that one is involved in with media. So a lot of times I work with people on communication skills and empathy in order to get them to realize that there is life in relationships and not life just in media. And you would be surprised at the number of people who come into my office who are so engrossed in their media that they get caught up in these virtual relationships to the extent to which those overpower their marital or their relationship with their significant other. So that does happen, and breaking away is difficult, and it does take a long time. But I think it could start with anger in knowing that one is seduced and violated by media. So, yeah, I think you're right. We are engaged in a process that that seduces us, and we need to work on empathy, communication, realizing the other, and that sort of thing.
Any other questions or comments for Dr. Cohen? Yeah, no.
Hi.
Hi.
My name's Ian Hacking, physicist and philosopher who argues that memory is actually the third leg of power. The idea being that there's biopower, knowledge, and then memory. As you were talking about fusion and media, Jeffrey Olek goes on to say that media is a form of memory, like it's already happened, right? By the time we're interacting with it, it's become memory, right? And so I'm wondering how, in this kind of model, that starts to challenge or function. I think this is building off of what Dr. B was saying earlier, but I'm wondering about how it winds up becoming integrated into our sense of cultural identity differently, right? Because if it's already part of our cultural meaning, then it means that, for example, if we're going to focus on Trump and totalitarianism, he is always already a totalitarian, and that we projected both forward and back at the same time, right? So then how do we challenge that with this model? It's already
Wow.
Sorry, I'm not sure. I apologize.
No. That's a very good question. How do we challenge? I think it's everyone's job to meet people and to challenge them. To challenge them in a way that I don't know. I guess what I would say is that this needs to happen on a one-to-one basis or in a human-to-human encounter. You know, not, yeah, I mean, that was a good question. I have to admit. A very hard one to answer. The only way I can see breaking away from this process would be by meeting with people. Sometimes we have a group in our town here in Roanoke where a person can go that has Asperger's, which actually is no longer a diagnosis. We have now the autism spectrum, but they can go and meet with people who are also very inhibited in their interaction with other people, and they can learn to communicate in such a way that is efficacious, you know. So again, what I think happens is that the person needs to be encountered with other people, actual people, and not media personalities of people.
So it's an insurrectionist disruption, right? You have to have some kind of massive.
Can you repeat that? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
So perhaps it has to be a total disruption, right? Like it requires massive discomfort, right? Because what you're talking about is not comfortable for the person who's being forced to go through a particular kind of process. Learning to shift your communication style is difficult and also an identity threat that could make people double down on their identity process, right? So, right, that poses a different level of concern. Okay. Yes.
I would think that it, in some ways, builds resistance.
Right. Yeah, that's the only way to do that, right? Is to force that discomfort.
So how does an online university fit into that?
Okay. Chris, can you summarize that question and those responses? Because there's a lot of echoing going on and I'm not hearing them.
Sure. Just focus on Gary's point. Yeah. You want to say that again, Gary?
How does an online university fit into your thoughts?
Oh, the online university. Okay. It's useful. That's how I got my degree. We're doing it right now. This is happening right now. Sure. So we're so used to it. How does the university fit, the online university fit in? Well, there is no escape. There is no total escape. I think there is an escape from hate, and there's an escape from media that pushes, hate narratives. But yeah, sure, we're involved in it right now, and it's just how involved you become that creates the problem.
I would say it seems to go from value to disvalue based upon volume, so to speak.
So could you repeat the last part of that?
It seems to go from value to disvalue based upon how much you're involved.
Yes.
Okay, let's see, any other questions? Well, let's all please thank Dr. Miller. Well, I think that concludes the. Did you have a hand? Yeah.
If possible, I would love to hear from you. I don't know if people want presentation, but I'll just throw it out. I'd love to hear his presentation.
Right. I'm not sure what kind of shape it is in the moment, but maybe we can arrange for it.
I can only say.
Really elaborate, so he's probably not really, even in a couple weeks, or I know.
Well, thanks so much, Chris. It's great to see you. Good to see you. Thanks for the presentation.
Sure. Bye.
Yeah. Take care.
I have to be look at on the front desk.
We need to log out or anything?
I don't think so. No, I think we're good. Mary over there.
Yeah.
Whatever needs to be done.
Other than your clip. Work.
Oh, yeah. Well, the one thing is, I was just like, I'll just sum it up because all it is flipping the coins and heads.
I had it illustrated so many times, and I still forget, but the best thing is to download that thing, have it on the stick,
Yeah.
try to do that, everything.
I know.
But then those hardware fails of it, I had it.
Well, the copies that typically, basically,
It's just like, it is, and then if I look at it, that's one solution I have. One is the whole hardware, and then they put it in there, just so it's nice to see,
Unfortunately, it's simple.
I broke my own computer and then whatever cables I had to fit out. Yeah, I never played it anymore.
How do we know?
That's why.
That's good for the
There was an email that had what room is the next
15 to 120. So that's going to be downstairs.
Okay.
One thing.